One of the most misunderstood concepts in modern intimacy is the idea that great sex comes from great performance. That if you learn the right moves, master the right techniques, or say all the right things at the right time, the experience will magically become profound. This is not only wrong, it's dangerously misleading, because it directs your attention away from what actually matters. Intimacy, real intimacy, isn't built through performance. It's built through presence. Now, presence is not a casual thing. It's not just being in the room or even touching another person's body. Presence means showing up fully with your attention, your awareness, your emotional attunement. It means you're not scattered. You're not preoccupied with some image of yourself. You're not wondering if you're doing it right. You're there with the other person in the moment, fully. That sounds simple, but psychologically it's incredibly difficult. Because most of us live in a state of divided attention. We're pulled in 100 directions at once. Work, screens, stress, the narrative loops playing in our minds. We don't even realize how distracted we've become until we try to connect with another person. And suddenly it's awkward. The energy doesn't flow. The spark feels forced. The intimacy stalls. And then we blame desire or our partners or the relationship itself, when in truth what's lacking is not chemistry. It's presence. There's a very important concept in psychology called attunement. It refers to the ability to be deeply in sync with another person's emotional state, to feel them, to understand them intuitively, to pick up on their subtle signals without them having to spell things out. This is something we develop in early childhood, ideally through a caregiver who is responsive, emotionally available, and grounded. That attunement becomes a kind of internal template. And when we feel that again in adult relationships, when someone is truly present with us, our nervous system recognizes it. We relax, we open, we feel safe enough to be seen. And in that space, sexual intimacy can deepen into something truly transformative. Without presence, however, the opposite happens. The nervous system stays on alert. Even if the touch is soft, even if the scene is set just right, the deeper parts of us don't engage. Because our partner isn't with us, they're in their head, or performing for a fantasy, or looking through us instead of at us. The body may be present, but the mind and heart are absent. That's not intimacy. That's emotional disconnection dressed in erotic clothing. This is why performance as a primary orientation always fails in the long run, because it's rooted in ego. It's about being good, being impressive, being desirable. But the moment you become more focused on how you're coming across than how you're connecting, you've exited the realm of true intimacy. You've made the other person an audience, not a partner. And what people actually crave, what they're starved for, is not another performance, it's to be seen, to be known, to be met fully. Presence also demands that we confront our discomfort with silence, slowness, and uncertainty. These are often the doorways to real connection, but they're also the moments we tend to rush past. We fill the space with noise, with action, with distraction, because we're afraid of being still with another person, afraid of what might rise to the surface. But that discomfort is where intimacy begins. To stay with someone in that space, to hold their gaze, to feel your breath sync with theirs, to notice the rise and fall of tension and surrender. That's presence. That's what allows sexual energy to expand, deepen, and evolve. And here's the most fascinating part. The more present you become, the more intuitive your actions become. You no longer have to perform because you're not operating from a script. You're responding to what's real. You touch where it matters. You pause when it's needed. You speak less but say more because you're tuned in, you're awake, and your partner can feel it. They're not being managed, they're being met. This is what separates sex that is merely physical from sex that is emotionally alive. And the irony is, when you let go of trying to be good and choose instead to be there, you become exponentially more attractive because presence communicates power. It says, I am grounded, I am here, I am with you, and that is rare, that is magnetic. So if you want to build deep intimacy that leads to truly incredible sex, stop asking, what should I do? And start asking, can I be here fully? Because the person who can bring that kind of presence consistently, courageously, is the one who unlocks the kind of connection most people only fantasize about. In a world full of distraction, presence is the ultimate seduction. Let's talk about honesty, specifically emotional honesty, because if presence is the soil where intimacy grows, emotional honesty is the seed, and yet it's one of the hardest things for people to practice in relationships. Not because they're malicious, not because they want to deceive, but because emotional honesty demands a level of self-awareness and courage that most people haven't developed. And I say that without judgment, just as a fact of our psychologically fragmented, culturally guarded age. Most people want deep intimacy. They want to be loved fully, known deeply, connected meaningfully. But they also want to be liked. They want to be accepted. They want to avoid conflict, avoid rejection, avoid the discomfort that comes from being vulnerable. And that's where the paradox lies. Because you can't have intimacy without vulnerability. And you can't be vulnerable without telling the truth, not just the truth of facts, but the truth of your feelings, your needs, your insecurities, your desires. This is where emotional honesty becomes more than a virtue. It becomes a gateway. You can perform well in a relationship for years. You can be loyal, attractive, sexually available, even kind. But if you're not being emotionally honest, if you're not showing your partner who you really are, what you really feel, what you deeply long for, then the connection will plateau. It will stay surface level, even if the logistics of your relationship function just fine. You begin to feel distant, misunderstood, alone beside someone who technically knows you, but only knows the curated version of you. Let's take this to the psychological core. Human beings are deeply social creatures, and from early development, we learn to suppress parts of ourselves to maintain attachment. This is adaptive. We need love to survive, so we shape ourselves to fit in, to be safe, to be wanted. But in adulthood, those old patterns become prisons. We don't speak our needs because we fear they're too much. We hide our pain because we fear being seen as weak. We pretend we're fine sexually because we don't want to embarrass ourselves or disappoint our partner. And so we fracture internally. We become split between what we show and what we feel. And that split is the death of intimacy. In the sexual context, this is even more pronounced. Because sex is not just about bodies, it's about identity, shame, power, trust, vulnerability. If you can't speak openly about what arouses you, or what scares you, or what turns you off, if you can't bring your whole, imperfect, messy emotional self into the space, then sex becomes constrained. It becomes scripted. The spontaneity dries up. The tension turns brittle. The passion becomes something you chase instead of something that emerges. But when emotional honesty is present, something extraordinary happens. The relationship becomes a container for truth. You're no longer pretending. You're no longer playing a role. You're showing up raw. And yes, that can lead to conflict. Yes, it can be uncomfortable, but it's real. And realness is the foundation of trust. Because when someone tells you the truth of who they are, not just the polished parts, but the vulnerable parts, and you respond with understanding, that builds something unbreakable. You're no longer just two people having sex. You're two people witnessing each other fully. This doesn't mean dumping your emotions recklessly or demanding that your partner accept every thought without question. Emotional honesty requires discernment. It requires responsibility. It's not about weaponizing your truth. It's about revealing it in a way that invites deeper connection, not greater division. And that takes skill. That takes maturity. But the reward is enormous, because when two people become emotionally transparent with each other and they stay emotionally present through that transparency, the sex that follows is unlike anything else. It's not just pleasurable, it's bonding, It's healing. It feels like coming home to a place you didn't know you were missing. Most people are not afraid of sex. They're afraid of being seen. But the irony is, being seen is the very thing that makes sex feel meaningful. When you let someone see you, truly see you, and they stay, and they respond, and they desire you, not in spite of what you've revealed, but because of it, something deep, something ancient. And that's when real intimacy begins. So ask yourself, not just once, but often, am I telling the truth? Am I saying what I really feel? Am I showing up in my relationship as a full person or just the version I think is safe and likable? Because intimacy is built on truth. And if you don't risk telling it, you'll never truly be loved. You'll only be approved of. And there's a world of difference between the two. When we talk about intimacy, real intimacy, not the glossy kind marketed in films or sold in magazines, we inevitably have to talk about safety. Not physical safety, although that's foundational, but psychological safety. The kind of internal state that allows you to take off the armor, let the mask drop, and risk being fully human with another person. Most people don't understand how critical this is, especially when it comes to sex. They assume that passion and desire come from novelty, technique, or chemistry. But the truth is, desire can't fully awaken where the nervous system doesn't feel safe. Let's look at it through a neurobiological lens. Your nervous system is always scanning for threat. It's asking, am I safe here? Can I relax? This is primal. It's hardwired, and it's not just about physical danger, it's about emotional risk. The body knows when it's being judged. It knows when there's hostility simmering beneath the surface, even if it's unspoken. It knows when your partner is distracted, disconnected, or secretly resentful. And when your nervous system perceives threat, it contracts. It shuts down. That contraction is the death of intimacy. You can go through the motions, you can perform all the right behaviors, but the deeper part of you won't engage. Think about it. How can someone surrender into pleasure if they're walking on eggshells? How can they explore erotic vulnerability if they fear rejection or ridicule? You can't open up fully to someone if you're simultaneously protecting yourself from them. And so what we see in many relationships is a kind of guarded sexuality, technically functional, perhaps even exciting in short bursts, but lacking depth. There's no real surrender because surrender requires trust, and trust requires safety. Now, this doesn't mean creating a space of passive appeasement or emotional coddling. Safety isn't about being nice all the time. It's about being consistent, honest, and accountable. It's about cultivating the kind of relationship where people know that their emotional experience matters, that they can bring their joy, their anger, their confusion, and their longing without being punished, manipulated, or dismissed. It means that when they speak, they're heard. Not just listened to, but received. That's the foundation, that's the container where desire isn't just sustained, it deepens. There's an irony here though, because a lot of people assume that safety is the enemy of eroticism. They believe that danger is what makes sex exciting, the unpredictable, the mysterious, the forbidden. And to an extent, that's true. Erotic energy thrives on tension. But the kind of danger that enhances desire is chosen, playful, and consensual. It's the thrill of stepping into the unknown together from a base of trust. That's very different from the danger of emotional volatility or unspoken resentment, which erodes desire over time. There's a reason why most people don't fantasize about being vulnerable with someone who might lash out or disappear emotionally. We crave intensity, but only when it's held within a secure container. Creating psychological safety in a relationship isn't just about emotional support, it's also about integrity. Can you be trusted to tell the truth, to own your mistakes, to hold space for your partner's pain without needing to fix it or shut it down? Those things matter because when people feel emotionally safe, they become more creative, more playful, more sexually expressive. They're not bracing for impact, they're leaning in, they're exploring, and in that exploration, desire flourishes. This is especially important in long-term relationships because over time, novelty fades. What's left is the quality of your connection. If you haven't built psychological safety, the passion becomes harder to access. Not because love has died, but because the emotional environment no longer supports vulnerability. And without vulnerability, there is no seduction, no unfolding, no mystery. You're just repeating routines, hoping something ignites. But when you do have that safety, when both people know in their bones that they can bring their full selves to the table, something incredible happens. You don't need constant novelty to feel excitement. You just need to keep showing up with truth, with presence, with curiosity. And every time you do, the connection renews itself. The couples who maintain incredible sex lives over decades aren't the ones chasing constant stimulation. They're the ones who built emotional ecosystems where desire can breathe, where there's enough safety for risk, enough trust for surrender, enough space for each person's evolution. So if you want deeper intimacy and unforgettable sex, don't ask how to spice things out. Ask how to calm things down. Ask how to build an emotional landscape where openness feels natural, not dangerous. Because when safety is real, the rest can unfold with surprising beauty and power. In a world that rewards emotional detachment and superficial pleasure, be the one who creates a space where someone else can truly exhale. That's where intimacy lives. And that's where the kind of sex most people only dream of begins. Let's turn our attention to something most people underestimate in the pursuit of deep intimacy and truly fulfilling sex: the role of curiosity. Not just intellectual curiosity, but relational curiosity. The kind that asks not, how can I get more from this person, but who is this person really beneath the surface? It's a mindset, a posture of the soul, you might say. And without it, relationships become stale, predictable, mechanistic. We start relating to our partners as if we already know everything there is to know about them. We project, assume, shortcut. And in doing so, we kill the mystery. And mystery, paradoxically, is essential for intimacy to evolve. You see, people think they fall out of love because the chemistry fades or because they've grown apart. But very often, what's actually faded is curiosity. We stop seeing our partner as an unfolding mystery. We think we've mapped them out. And the moment we stop being curious, we start relating to a version of them we created in our minds, not to the living, changing person right in front of us. That's a philosophical problem because it reveals something about how we relate to the world itself. Do we approach life as something to be known, mastered, controlled, or as something to be explored, encountered, and engaged with humility? Relationships, particularly sexual ones, are mirrors of that deeper posture. If you approach your partner with fixed expectations, if you think you already know what they like, what they need, how they respond, then you've already stopped listening, Lilia. And if you've stopped listening, you've stopped seeing. This is especially dangerous in long-term relationships because the longer we know someone, the more likely we are to confuse familiarity with understanding. But they're not the same. Familiarity is based on patterns, habits, repetition. Understanding, especially in the context of intimacy, requires presence and curiosity. It means you stay attentive, you stay open, you understand that the person you love is not a static object. They are an unfolding narrative. And you have to keep reading. Nowhere is this more evident than in the sexual dynamic. Curiosity is what transforms sex from an act into an exploration. It turns the bedroom into a laboratory of discovery, not in a clinical way, but in a deeply human way. When you approach your partner with curiosity, you're not trying to perform for them. You're asking them implicitly, what's true for you in this moment? What moves you? What turns you on emotionally, physically, spiritually? And how do I respond not just with technique, but with attunement? That kind of curiosity fosters playfulness. It invites experimentation, not for novelty's sake, but because you're both participating in something dynamic. You're co-creating an experience rather than just repeating what worked last time. And the beauty is, when both people are engaged from this place, sex becomes less about outcomes and more about connection. You're not chasing a peak, you're building a landscape. But curiosity takes humility. It requires you to let go of ego, of the assumption that you already know how to please someone or that your way is the best way. And it requires the courage to ask questions that might yield surprising answers. What do you need right now? Is there anything you've been curious about but afraid to say? How does this feel, not just physically, but emotionally? These questions are powerful not because of the words themselves, but because of the attitude they represent. I want to know you more. I'm not done learning you. I'm not done discovering what's possible between us. That posture alone, that willingness to keep exploring, can reignite the kind of spark people spend years trying to recover. Because at the end of the day, what we crave most isn't novelty for novelty's sake, it's aliveness. And curiosity breathes life into everything it touches. It keeps the relationship evolving. It keeps the sexual connection vibrant. And perhaps most importantly, it keeps both partners engaged, not just with each other, but with themselves. So if you want to build deeper intimacy and awaken a sex life that feels alive, stop asking, what do I need to fix? And start asking, what haven't I discovered yet? Because the person in front of you is not a solved puzzle. They are a universe. And your job isn't to conquer them, it's to explore with reverence. When curiosity becomes a habit of the heart, intimacy becomes a living conversation. And in that space, sex becomes more than pleasure. It becomes a form of knowing, a sacred unfolding of two mysteries side by side. Let's talk about emotional attunement, not in the abstract, not as a vague relationship virtue, but as a precise and necessary skill. Because if we've already discussed presence, honesty, safety, and curiosity, then emotional attunement is the invisible thread that weaves them together. It's the capacity to sense another person's inner world, to listen not only to what is being said, but to what is being felt, even when it's unspoken. It's a form of empathy, yes, but it goes deeper than just understanding. It's about resonance, alignment. It's about being able to tune yourself to the emotional frequency of the person in front of you. And this, especially in intimate relationships, is what creates the kind of connection that makes deep, embodied, transformative sex possible. Now, people often conflate attunement with codependency or with walking on eggshells. That's not what we're talking about. Attunement doesn't mean losing yourself in the other. It doesn't mean prioritizing their feelings at the expense of your own truth. Quite the opposite. It begins with self-awareness. You can't attune to someone else unless you're grounded in yourself, because to truly perceive what someone else is feeling, you have to know what part of your own reaction is you and what part is the signal you're receiving from them. This is where most people stumble. They try to connect, but they're still operating through the filter of their own projections, insecurities, and unhealed wounds. So what happens? They misread signals. They assume rejection when there's simply silence. They assume disinterest when the other person is vulnerable and scared. They react to what they think is happening rather than attuning to what is happening. And this creates a cascade of disconnection, confusion, frustration, sexual shutdown, emotional withdrawal. Attunement interrupts that cycle. It invites you to slow down, to ask, what's going on for this person right now? What are they feeling beneath the surface? And how can I meet them where they actually are, rather than where I wish they were or fear they might be? That simple orientation to connect rather than control, to sense rather than assume, changes everything. And in the realm of sexuality, it's indispensable because the body doesn't lie. You can't fake emotional safety. You can't fake interest. You can't fake real desire. Not in a way that sustains connection. When two people are attuned to each other emotionally, their sexual dynamic becomes fluid, responsive. They're not just acting out roles, they're responding in real time to what's actually happening. And in that responsiveness, intimacy deepens. Trust expands. Pleasure becomes less performative, more embodied. Let's look at this psychologically. Emotional attunement activates our attachment system in a healthy way. It tells the nervous system you are seen, you are felt, you are safe. And when that message is consistently reinforced, the body begins to relax. It opens. The defenses lower. The need to posture, to impress, to manipulate, that all begins to dissolve. And in that space, real erotic energy can emerge, not from fantasy or control, but from presence and trust. This also creates the conditions for deeper emotional expression, because if your partner feels attuned to you, they're more likely to share things they haven't said before. They'll reveal needs, desires, even fears they've been holding back. And now you're in sacred territory. You're no longer just interacting with your partner's surface personality. You're engaging their interior world. And that's the essence of deep intimacy. It's not about knowing facts about someone. It's about knowing their experience and letting your presence affirm it as valid. That this requires discipline. Emotional attunement isn't a passive trait. It's not something you either have or don't have. It's a muscle. It has to be trained. It means practicing active listening, not just hearing words, but listening for tone, for subtext, for emotional color. It means asking clarifying questions instead of making assumptions. It means learning to regulate your own reactivity so that you can stay present with someone else's vulnerability. This is hard work, but it's the kind of work that makes relationships thrive. And yes, it makes sex better, immeasurably so, because when you are emotionally attuned to your partner, you pick up on the micro signals, a subtle breath shift, a change in energy, a glance that speaks volumes. You respond, they respond, and suddenly what you're engaged in isn't just sex, it's dialogue, it's co-creation, it's a living exchange of energy, trust, and mutual revelation. Too many people chase techniques and tricks in the bedroom, thinking that performance will carry them to fulfillment. But no amount of technique can substitute for attunement, because desire in its highest form isn't about what you do, it's about how you connect. It's about how you feel the other person and how they feel you, not just as bodies, but as beings. So if you want to transform your intimacy, begin here. Develop the discipline of attunement. Learn to sense without grasping, to listen without interrupting, to feel without needing to fix. Because in that quiet mastery, you create a container for connection that few people ever experience, but all of us deeply crave. And in the end, that's what we want, to be known not as objects of desire, but as souls worth feeling. And there is no greater invitation than that. Often what's missing is the energy that growth brings into the space between two people. When you see your partner pushing themselves, wrestling with hard truths, aspiring to something greater than comfort, when they surprise you with their evolution, you can't help but respect them more. You're reminded that they are not yours to possess, but to witness. And that awe, that recognition of their independence and expansion is deeply erotic. Not in a superficial sense, but in the way it reawakens your desire to meet them again, to reintroduce yourself, to rediscover each other. This is where the philosophical layer becomes crucial, because at the core of shared growth is a kind of existential orientation. Are we here to avoid discomfort or to confront it with courage? Are we seeking pleasure as a substitute for meaning or as an expression of it? When two people agree, even implicitly, that life is not about staying safe, but about becoming more conscious, more integrated, more whole, then their relationship becomes a container for transformation, and that's sacred. This also allows conflict to become productive rather than destructive. When growth is the shared goal, arguments stop being about winning. They become opportunities for understanding, for clearing illusions, for integrating shadows. You stop being afraid of disagreement because you know it's part of the process. And when this kind of psychological safety is established, intimacy deepens. You trust that you can say the hard thing. You trust that your pain, your questions, even your desires won't break the bond. You trust that they might actually strengthen it. And in that trust, sex takes on a new dimension. It becomes a place of expression, of catharsis, of communion. You're not just bodies going through motions, you're souls meeting in a shared state of becoming. You can bring your vulnerability to the bedroom, your growth edge, your hunger for more. Not just more sensation, but more truth, more contact, more being. And your partner sees you not just as who you are, but who that is profoundly intimate and profoundly arousing. But here's the challenge. Shared growth requires intentionality. It doesn't happen by accident. You have to choose it. You have to create space for it. That might look like reading a book together, going to therapy, setting shared goals, having regular conversations about what's really going on beneath the surface. And perhaps most importantly, it means being willing to outgrow parts of yourselves, even parts that were comfortable, or even parts that once connected you, because the only way to stay connected long term is to keep evolving together. There's a paradox here. The more individually whole you become, the more deeply you can connect. Because connection isn't about dependency, it's about resonance. And resonance requires authenticity. When two people are both becoming more of who they truly are, their relationship becomes a powerful force, not just for pleasure, but for awakening. So if you want intimacy that lasts, intimacy that doesn't just lead to great sex, but is great sex, commit to growing, not just for yourself, but with your partner. Because in the end, love isn't static. It's a verb. It's a practice. And when practiced together, it becomes a fire that doesn't burn out. It refines,